Hi, I'm in a pickle right now because of my deranged mother and equally stupid soon to be ex husband who have teamed up to absolutely destroy my peace of mind just for their own greed. I wish I could talk about this to the people I'm friends with, but this feels just too personal and embarrassing to discuss with anyone I know in real life. And trust me, you all will know why I'm saying that once I tell you guys what I'm going through. I don't have much family to speak of, so I can't exactly talk to anyone else either. So I'm here, turning to the Reddit community, mainly to get this off my chest and also make sure that I'm not the bad guy here in any capacity, like I'm being made to believe. So this all started just 2 weeks ago when, out of absolutely nowhere, my husband of 3 years, let's call him Kevin, told me that he wanted to break up with me because he developed feelings for my mom. Yeah, you're reading that right. And no, I'm not joking. Believe me, I was just as taken aback as you guys probably are right now, and definitely a lot more disgusted when he confessed, when he told me that he'd been having an affair with her for 3 months now. I'd never noticed because I'd been busy with work and his behavior had really never been suspicious enough for me to take note anyway. For context, my mother is just 20 years older than I am. I'm 27 right now. My mother is 47. My mother had me while she was in college, but my dad was never in the picture. He broke up with my mom the day she told him that she was pregnant and even tried to get her to terminate the pregnancy. But she wanted an excuse to drop out of college back then, so she decided to have me anyway and told my gran, her mother, that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. My grandparents were rich enough to let her do that, but they still weren't happy with her decision to drop out of college. They tried to get her to go back after I was born, but she refused and instead dabbled in a bunch of professions before settling on interior decoration. Not an interior designer, she doesn't design anything, but just advises people on where to put their furniture and how to decorate their rooms to make it visually appealing. It's a whole rich people shindig, so she's pretty good at it. She's not a qualified professional, but since my grandpa was a well-known realtor, he'd get her jobs. My mom is the flakiest, most unreliable person I've ever known, and she's really lucky that she belonged to an affluent family because otherwise she'd be out on the streets. I was practically raised by my grandparents because my mother never had enough time for me. She wasn't busy with work. She was busy being a social butterfly while I was a kid, and I actually used to think that my grandparents were probably my biological parents, and my mom was my older sister or something. That's how I spent my childhood, and by the time I hit my teens, I had no hopes for my mother because she was still just as carefree about her life as she was in the past. My grandpa passed away while I was in seventh grade, and then on, it was just me and my gran against the world. The world including my mother, because most of the time she was a total pain to deal with. I mean, if you ever have to explain to your mother as a 15-year-old why it's not a good idea for her to go to Iceland with a guy she met on Tinder just 2 days ago, then you'd know what my teen years were like. She's a total idiot and has no concern for how her behavior affects other people, not even her own family. Gran had drilled the idea into my head that I was on my own after she passed on because my mother would never be of any help to me. So I worked bloody hard and made my way to the top of the company I was in right now because I didn't want to leave anything to chance. I'm the COO at my firm, and I earn twice the amount Kevin does. He's the head of sales at a smaller firm, but I'd never ever judged him for it or made him feel smaller. Part of the reason for that was the fact that I'd graduated from one of the finest business schools in the state and interned at the very company I work in right now, thanks to Gran's connections. She taught me to be humble, unlike Kevin and my mother, who thought they were real big superstars over something they weren't even sure of yet. I met my husband at a common friend's birthday party about 5 years back, and we got along like a house on fire because we shared a lot of common interests. We went out for 2 years, and when he proposed, I didn't have to think twice before I said yes. He was a good man, or at least I thought he was back then. He'd always joked about how I had a hot mother, which wasn't entirely untrue. I would never call her hot because she's insane and also she's my mother, but I cannot deny that she fits the beauty standards well for her age. I mean, she's made a significant amount of money from scamming people into believing that her so-called feng shui decor worked. And a lot of that money has gone into makeup and Botox, so of course she's attractive for her age. Also, I don't mean to demean the actual professionally trained decoration specialists, and I guess maybe the real feng shui works, but whatever my mother does is a scam because she literally doesn't know the first thing about it. I respect the people who actually know what they're doing, but since my mom doesn't count as one of those professionals, and she's also just a generally crappy person, I think I'm allowed to speak badly of her. I thought Kevin would be different from the other men I dated in the past, though, and that I'd be able to trust him, but that turned out to be a bust as well. He'd joke about how my mother was hot enough to pass off as my sister, and despite my strained relationship with her, I'd laugh it off because nobody would imagine that something like this could actually happen to them. I'd only ever kept in touch with my mother because of Gran. She made me who I am, and I'll be eternally grateful for that. Even if that meant having to deal with her psychotic daughter, she was never ready to give up on Mom because she was a good woman who loved her daughter in spite of all her flaws. And then there's my mom, who could never bring herself to love me more than herself in spite of all the efforts I put in. Even after Gran passed away almost a year ago, I still try to keep in touch with my mom. Our relationship was bad, but I still found myself looking out for her, more out of a sense of obligation towards Gran than for her sake. But that ended when Kevin told me about the affair. 2 weeks ago, he sat me down after I returned in the evening from a business trip and told me with a straight face that he was in love with my mother and that they wanted to be together now. I thought he was joking at first and laughed at it, but for the first time he didn't laugh. He went on to tell me in great detail how he and my mom had been fooling around behind my back for 3 months. Kevin and I fought over something stupid, and my mother had texted him at the time to ask for advice on how to fix her headphones. That's how they got to talking, and slowly it turned into something more than a friendship. They didn't intend to take it far initially, but it just happened and they couldn't help themselves. I'm sure Kevin didn't mind that my mother looked so much like me, too. I kicked him out that very night and he left without much of a fuss because he knew that he could just go to my mother's place instead. I think I must have finished an entire bottle of wine while crying like a damn baby that night. I was up till the wee hours of the morning just sobbing so hard that my eyes swelled up to twice their size. At around 4:30 in the morning, not being able to deal with the overwhelming anger and pain of it all, I decided to text my mother. I was drunk, and that was probably what pushed me even more to send that text. I called her a lot of names and told her she was a crap daughter to Gran and a crap mother to me, and was getting even worse with age. I told her that she was a con artist at best, and once her Botox and fillers wore off, Kevin would see her for the ugly witch she was and dump her as well. I didn't expect her to respond to that, but she did, and boy was that response eye-opening. She told me that she might lose her beauty one day, but she'd never lose her bank balance, which was about to increase tenfold thanks to Gran's will. I'd totally forgotten about that while grieving Gran, but her lawyer had told us that we'd be informed of what exactly she'd left us after the probate period passed. It would take almost 6 to 9 months, and it had already been 7 months, so we'd be hearing from him shortly. Gran had instructed her lawyer not to inform us of what exactly to expect before the probate period passed. The only thing that we were allowed to know was where she wanted to be buried, and that's all. So neither my mother nor I knew what she'd left us. But since she had a lot of money, assets, and property, we were expecting a lot. Or rather, my mom was, because all I cared about at the time Gran passed away was that she was gone, and now I was truly on my own. The contents of her will didn't matter to me much because either way, I don't care for money more than my relationships. But evidently Kevin did, and that's why he chose my mom over me, because both of them expected her inheritance to be greater than mine. They must have been confident about it too, because the way my mother bragged about it to me made me feel as if she'd already heard back from the lawyer and knew what she was going to be inheriting before I did. Anyway, I didn't reply to that text afterward and tried to erase it all from my mind. I spoke to my lawyer the very next day and told her that I wanted to file for divorce at the earliest. Within a week of Kevin's confession, I'd filed for divorce and he'd been served. Now, all we had to do was wait for this to end so he could live out the rest of his days with his ex-wife's mom, but something miraculous happened. And I truly have to thank Gran for this one, because even after she's gone, she still has my back. I'd already requested Gran's lawyer, the executor of the will, to inform us separately because I couldn't bear to be in the same room as my mother and Kevin. So 5 days back, she told me that my mother had already been informed of what she'd inherited, and it was my turn now. I visited her with zero expectations because I really didn't know what was going to happen. But while leaving, I think I must have been the happiest damn person to exist on this planet at the time. I'd inherited all my grandmother's money, assets, and property, while my mother inherited nothing but a diamond ring and matching diamond earrings that Gran used to wear. That's all my mother inherited. Apparently, the reason Gran left everything to me was because she'd looked after my mom her entire life, but now that she was nearly 50, my mother was old enough to start looking after herself. So ironically enough, my Gran, who had always told me that I'd be on my own after she passed away, had made sure to make me independent enough not to rely on my inheritance, and the one woman who'd been counting on Gran her entire miserable life had been left with absolutely nothing. So really, she was the one who was on her own. It was karma at its wicked best, and I'd never felt as vindicated as I did that moment. My mother had come to know just an hour before I did, but after that, I didn't know what was going to happen. I was excited because I knew that even if my mother didn't try to contact me, Kevin surely would, and that's exactly what happened. The guy could have waited it out just for the sake of putting up a show, but he had no patience and texted me the very next day saying that he'd made a huge mistake and wanted to come back to me if I'd still have him. He said that he and my mother were never meant to be, and spending those few days with her had made him realize how good he had it with me. So now he'd come to his senses and wanted to give our marriage a second chance. I literally laughed out loud when I read his lousy attempt at reconciliation. They probably had no idea that I knew my mother had inherited barely anything, and there was no huge inheritance to look forward to anymore. After one whole day of contemplating what to say to Kevin, I finally responded to his text with a clown emoji and then blocked him. I was also 100% sure that he must not have come clean to my mom either, so for good measure I took a screenshot of the text he'd sent me and sent it to my mother with 3 clown emojis. I turned my phone off after that because I didn't want to deal with any of the drama that was inevitably going to happen next. Instead, I chose to watch Netflix and enjoy my night without letting Kevin or my mother bother me anymore. The next morning, I got to know about the aftermath of my text. My mom's next door neighbor's daughter is the one who told me about everything that went down. My mom still lives in the house I grew up in, for your information. My grandpa had left that house to his wife and daughter to live in, so after Gran's passing, my mother continued to live there. The neighbor's daughter and I are friends, so she was quite candid with me and told me that around 10, she started hearing a lot of yelling from my mom's place. But nobody bothered to check because their family knew what kind of person my mom was and didn't like her one bit. Then there was screaming all of a sudden, and that's what finally brought them out. My crazy mother had physically kicked Kevin out of the house, and he was lying on the pavement while my mother threw all sorts of stuff at him and screamed the most vile, disgusting things at him. Kevin had screamed because she'd grabbed a hardcover book and thrown it at him, and unfortunately it had hit him right in the forehead. When her neighbors discovered him, he'd already been hit and was trying to stop the bleeding with his hand. It was a deep gash and he'd had to get 5 stitches for it, which was pretty horrifying to hear. He also pressed charges against my mother, and while she only had to pay a huge fine because it was a misdemeanor at most, it was still scary because Kevin was actually badly hurt. She hadn't intended for him to get so hurt, and neither had she been in her senses at the time, so the cops let her off easily. It also helped that she had a really good lawyer and was friends with the DA's wife. Of course, my mother blamed me for it once she got back home and texted me a bunch of horrible things from her second number that I hadn't blocked, which I've been trying my best to ignore, but I really can't help wondering if what happened really was my fault or not. What Kevin and my mother did to me is definitely unforgivable, but now I feel like I should have just counted my own blessings instead of trying to meddle in their lives to mess with them. What I did was out of spite and anger too, and it's not like I'm proud of it or whatever. If I'd known that this would have such insane consequences, then I never would have sent my mother that screenshot. I literally only just wanted to make them both feel bad, but I didn't ever intend for anyone to seriously get hurt. My mother has never had any history of physical violence. Not to my knowledge, at least, so this wasn't something I could have ever thought of beforehand. I feel terrible about what happened, and my mother's constant attempts to victimize herself and make me look like the bad guy are making it worse. Even Kevin has been posting cryptic notes about betrayal and stuff, which is highly ironic, but that's beside the point right now. I feel like they're making me the bad guy just to shift the blame onto someone else, but I don't know. AITA for trying to mess up my mother and soon-to-be ex-husband's relationship after my mother bragged about how she stole my man with an inheritance she doesn't even have. Update 1. Okay, so thanks you guys for being so incredibly supportive in the comments. Thank you for all your kind words, especially the people who were appreciating Gran. Yeah, she was one of a kind, and I think I was very lucky to have her in my life. Truly one of the luckiest people alive to have had a magnanimous personality like Gran's as part of my childhood. That does make up for having a mother like the one I do, LOL. I don't feel guilty anymore about what happened because what I did was not that big of a deal. They ruined my marriage, so I ruined their relationship, tit for tat. My mother's the one who went ballistic and attacked the guy she allegedly loves, so I'm not going to feel bad about that at all. She's the crazy one here, not me. And she sure as hell isn't going to make me feel like the villain when she did everything wrong. Kevin got hurt. I do feel bad for him because a physical attack is never justified, but at the same time, he's the same guy who literally cheated on his partner of so many years with their mother. That's just gross, and I can't imagine anyone thinking they still have the right to ask their partner to forgive them and take them back after doing something like that. He was two-timing both me and my mother. I'm sorry that he got hurt, but that's also not my fault. Not my fault, and not my problem either, so I've decided to block all of them on every single platform that exists. Heck, I even blocked my mother on PayPal, so you know it's serious. On a serious note, though, I've also been thinking about a restraining order because my mother lost it. There's no telling what she might get up to next. If she's annoyed at me for ruining her relationship, she might come for me next. I don't want that, but neither do I want to give up the home and career I've worked for so long and relocate just because my mother's crazy. So a restraining order is my best bet to protect myself against that psycho dinosaur now. I just hope it doesn't come to that. Update 2. It seems that I might have to file for a restraining order after all. I'd ignored my mother altogether for almost 2 weeks and was beginning to move on. Kevin had also responded to my divorce petition and he wasn't contesting it, so it felt like things were falling back into place. And with copious amounts of therapy and self love, I'd finally get over this nasty incident. Unfortunately, my mother decided to return to terrorize me, and yesterday I found her waiting for me in my front yard, right outside my door. I'd just come back home after a long day of work and I was in no mood. I told her to get away or I'd call the police from inside the car, but she didn't budge and instead told me that I could try whatever I wanted to, but she wasn't going to move until she had a word with me about the inheritance. I told her she could speak to me from a distance because I was curious to know what she wanted to say. So she told me very plainly that she wanted half of whatever I'd inherited because it was fair, since Gran was her mother and not just my grandma. I actually laughed in her face and told her that she was the last person who should be talking about what's fair. Then I told her to get out because I wasn't giving her jack and dialed 911 in case she tried anything funny. She glared at me and then started walking towards my car, and I instinctively rolled up my windows. I did it just in time too, because as soon as she came close to the car, she gave it one swift kick in the passenger side panel and dented it. I saw the dent only after I got out of the car, which I didn't do until I'd watched her get into her own car and drive away a considerable distance. I photographed it for evidence, and I'd already have the security footage from the cameras outside my house to prove that my mother had caused the dent. Then I called my lawyer and told her what had happened and said that I wanted to file a restraining order against my mother as well. So now that's happening as well. I guess my mother just doesn't like the idea of living a peaceful life and has to screw things up all the time. I did try to file a police report for it, but since she's friends with the DA's wife, the precinct head told me that his hands were tied and he couldn't help the situation. It's fine though, because at least I have the security footage and she can't change that. It shows her face and everything as well. I've even downloaded it and backed it up on my laptop so that I don't lose it at any point. The next couple of days are going to be stressful as hell with all the trips I'll have to take to court, but at least I'll get rid of these people. Update 3. Hey everyone, it's been busy lately with the divorce proceedings and everything. We're in the middle of settlement negotiations right now and it's so damn frustrating. At least I managed to get a restraining order against my mother last week, so that's done with. Phew. Kevin and his lawyer have concocted a bunch of lies, so I'm trying to put together all the proof of him cheating for the next meeting, and hopefully that'll be an end to this. It's annoying, but I'm going to therapy regularly to deal with my anger and process it so it doesn't get in the way of my daily life. If I've learned anything from this, it's that I don't want to end up like my crazy mom. I just had to vent here for a while, but I feel better now, and I guess I'll be back whenever the divorce is finalized. For now, this is it. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.